Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is out in theaters now. If you have seen it, this is going to be my spoiler-filled review of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And if you have seen it and you really liked it, you're probably emotionally traumatized. So this is going to be a full in-depth review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It's probably going to be the same style as my previous spoiler reviews of the past few years. It might be a lot of jumping around in this video, but that's why I put the topics in, so that you guys can go right directly to your topics, and I think that that's a good niche. So let's get to talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I saw it again, second time, liked it even more this time, so let's start off, I guess, let's talk about Rocket. That whole backstory with Rocket, I think, is the heart and soul of the movie. I think that that's the story James Gunn wanted to tell the entire time, and it makes scenes from the previous two Guardians films even more relevant and even more impactful now. Just seeing Rocket's backstory and how mistreated and abused he is. This is hard for animal lovers to watch. There's a lot of animal cruelty, a lot of animal abuse, but in the end, I didn't really look at it as the movie saying animal cruelty is a good thing. I looked at it as, we're better than this. Animals are precious. Let's save what makes the earth so wonderful. Because at the end of the movie, there's all these experiments that the High Evolutionary is doing. He's trying to make a perfect society, as he calls it. So there's children on board his ship that he's trying to experiment on, as well as other animals. And Rocket goes back to save the litter of raccoons. And then, as Rocket's saved later on in the movie, all of the Guardians save everyone on the ship. So even though there is a lot of animal abuse and cruelty in the movie, it also has this anti-animal abuse message, which is animals are precious. Leave them alone. They're part of Earth's natural habitat. You should never mistreat an animal because it's different than you, you know? And I think Rocket's backstory is so impactful with that as well, because you see the abuse and the pain that these animals go through. For instance, Rocket is a raccoon. You have Lila, who's an otter, Teefs, a walrus, essentially, and Floor, who I believe is a bunny. Looked like a bunny, at least. And all of them have deficiencies to them after they are genetically modified. And all of that, just trying to escape the pain and the torture of the High Evolutionary and his crazy-ass experiments that he's doing, I think really puts that anti-animal abuse message into progress. But let's talk about some of those scenes as well, because god damn it, many of those Rocket scenes tugged at the heartstrings. It's like emotional trauma. It's like experiencing a breakup and crying over it for days, honestly. Now, I said in my spoiler-free review that there was one scene that got me. It wasn't the scene where Rocket gets like the parts so he can make the key card to escape and try and bring Teefs, Lila, and Floor with him on a rocket ship so that they can escape. And then he opens the door and he hugs Lila, and then Lila is shot dead, and then the other two are shot dead as well. And you get to see what makes Rocket tick, which is a great scene, by the way. It wasn't that scene, although that did get a little bit of a reaction out of me the second time. It got a reaction out of me the first time where it was like, no! Because it's such an unexpected moment. But then the scene that got me both times is when Rocket has his near-death experience towards the end of the movie, and he sees Teefs, Lila, and Floor in his near-death experience, and you think Rocket's gonna die in that point. And essentially he does. He flatlines. That's what causes the near-death experience, but it's more the dialogue and the interaction he's having with Lila in this scene, where she's telling him, hey, you remember how you wanted to get in a rocket and go into the beautiful sky? I can tell you, the sky is beautiful. And he's just like, well, can I come? For some reason, it was that moment, that line of dialogue from Rocket that got the reaction from me the first time I saw it, even on this one. This time it was more of Lila holding out her robotic arm, pulling him back and saying, it's not your time. That got a reaction out of me. Like, I was legitimately bawling the first time I saw it. This one, I was able to choke it in a little bit more, but there were still, like, a couple teardrops.
We'll all fly away together. Into the forever. and beautiful sky.
And that's the thing, which is why I think that this movie is going to have so much rewatchability. It's still going to give you all of those emotions on rewatch as it would for the first time you see it. Like, I knew that that scene was coming. If there's ever a time where I have to get up for some reason to go get popcorn, bathroom, whatever it may be, if I've seen the movie again, I try to pinpoint the exact moments where I can get up, and that I was like, I don't want to miss that scene again, even though it got the reaction out of me that made me, essentially cry. So I didn't want to cry again, but I also wanted to see that scene again because I thought that that was the most emotionally investing scene in the movie. For some reason, it was that scene and not the one where Lila dies. Both of those scenes are great. I think they're both fantastically written. I think they're both fantastically shot, directed, but for some reason, it's the near death experience scene that got more of the reaction out of me than Lila, Teefs, and Floor getting shot to death. I have no idea why, but I really love that we saw that aspect of Rocket's backstory, that these were his only friends, but they might not have been his family. The Guardians of the Galaxy are his family. I love that he has really accepted the Guardians of the Galaxy as his family and his friends. So it gives him more of a purpose. And where the characters end up at the end of the film, I'm curious to know what's going to happen with Rocket. And I'll get some more of that in a minute because I'm curious to know what's going to happen with a lot of these characters. So I guess we should just talk about that. As I said, I'm jumping around a lot in this review. So the end of the movie, we see the Guardians part ways. Star-Lord goes back to Earth to reacquaint himself with his grandfather. Mantis goes off with the Asilisks, what I think that's what they're called. I have no idea. On a mission for self-discovery. Rocket becomes the leader of the Guardians. Drax and Nebula stay behind on Nowhere to help rebuild Nowhere. In the mid-credit scene, we have a new team of Guardians. It's Rocket, Groot, Kraglin, Adam Warlock, Adam Warlock's pet Blurp, I think his name, and then I don't know the little girl's name, but it's one of those girls that Drax and Nebula saved. So that's essentially our new Guardians of the Galaxy team. It did say at the end of the credits that Star-Lord would return, but I'm interested to see if Rocket's going to come back. I feel like it's going to be one of those situations where in the next Avengers movie or in what's the next one? Secret Wars or is that Kang Dynasty? I forget which one's first. Whichever one is second though, where it's like we're royally fucked. We cannot beat Kang. I feel like that's when Star-Lord's going to come back, and I feel as if maybe Drax, Rocket, Groot could also come back. Maybe that's when the original Guardians of the Galaxy team comes back. Who I don't think is going to come back is Zoe Saldana. I mean, never say never, but she has confirmed that this is the last time she is going to play Gamora. So I really am not expecting her to come back at all. But let's talk about Gamora for a minute. Gamora was interesting to say the least in this movie because I think people are expecting it to go one way, and that was the way I was expecting it to go, and then it goes a completely different way because she's a Ravager in this movie, which is cool, and she has more of that mentality that she has in the first Guardians movie and parts of the second movie where she's a little bit repulsed by Peter Quill. Interesting there, and much of the movie is spent with Peter trying to reacquaint his love with Gamora, and she's like, well, I'm not the Gamora that you knew. Like, I would never fall in love with you. There's scenes sprinkled throughout this movie where I feel like James Gunn wanted to fully go there, but kind of copped out at the end, because at the end, she goes back with the Ravagers, and she essentially says, I'm sorry, I'm not the Gamora that you want me to be, and they kind of leave it at that, and I think Star-Lord comes to terms with that. But at the same time, much of the movie is him pining over the fact that he lost Gamora, and it's not the same Gamora. He's trying to win the new Gamora over because it's the Gamora from the past, from before Thanos killed her, that came out of time, obviously, in Endgame. So that's how Gamora is in the movie. And I was really curious to see how they were going to do Gamora in this movie because of that. I honestly think killing Gamora in Infinity War was a mistake, because now you just ripped a whole dynamic out of the characters that I think you could have evolved on a little bit. And I guess you could call this evolution. But me, it just feels like we're retreading familiar ground with the first Guardians, and this is by no means the fault of the movie. I mean, James Gunn was kind of backed into a corner with Gamora, essentially since he said he didn't necessarily agree with a lot of the decisions that Infinity War made with the Guardians of the Galaxy. For instance, he didn't agree with Peter Quill being the one to essentially cause mass extinction with Thanos. And I can see why he's frustrated because both times I've seen the movie, I've said Gamora would have worked more in this movie if she didn't die in Infinity War. And then her past self come back in Endgame and get flung into the present. So it's interesting. And there's that whole time gap between Endgame and this movie. She goes off somewhere at the end of Endgame. And we can now assume that she went with the Ravagers, but like, what was she doing before she went to the Ravagers? You know, because you have Stallone and his crew come back. It's just, I don't think they're gonna like fully accept her right off the bat. So there's things that I think I wanted to see more with Gamora, but in the end, I'm satisfied in a way. That's a tough corner to write yourself out of. And James Gunn did the best he could with how Gamora was handled throughout the entire MCU so far. Adam Warlock, disappointment. I felt like he just became the brunt of a joke after a while. I think he worked a little bit more for me on second watch, but still not to the point where I think James Gunn wanted him to work. I needed a little bit more of emotional payoff with him, where this movie is so dark and focuses on emotional drama and trauma. I think the scene where his mother Aisha dies, you know, the head of the Sovereign from the second movie, where she dies, I think that needed a bit more of a gut reaction out of him. I get what the actual like consequence is, that he becomes good and joins the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he doesn't really have a moment to mourn. And I kind of wish that that was an aspect of his character, because sometimes with these new characters, James Gunn kind of treats them like they're a joke, and that's essentially how I felt Adam Warlock was. I think the subplot with him trying to get Rocket is a bit of a mess, but it's not as messy as, say, some of the subplots in Wakanda Forever, which, by the way, I prefer Guardians of the Galaxy to Wakanda Forever. Wakanda Forever was my favorite movie in Phase 4 and 5 in this multiverse saga. It's now Guardians 3, and I think it's because Guardians 3's subplots actually wrap up in a more satisfying way and actually coalesce together with the main plot, as opposed to Wakanda Forever, where I'm just like, why is Martin Freeman in this movie? Like, there's literally no point. He does nothing this entire movie. And you could say that about Adam Warlock. I think that there was more payoff there, even if it feels like it's a bit of a mess, because that is essentially the messiest part of the movie. All those different subplots coming together and coalescing together. But I just think Adam Warlock himself as a character is a giant joke, and that's one of James Gunn's weaknesses. He turns iconic comic book characters like that into jokes. They just become the brunt of a joke. Like, Adam Warlock is really fucking stupid in this movie. And I don't mean stupid like, oh, he's like written poorly. No, I mean like he's literally like a dumbass. He's like Drax 2.0, because Drax just became the dumb idiot after a while. He's essentially Drax 2.0. Like, he's that stupid. The High Evolutionary. Okay, I don't know if this is going to get a mixed reaction from a lot of people, because I did see one comparison online that he is essentially Thanos, and I agree. But there's two different extremes here. The extremes they're going to are completely different. I think you can have similar goals, but different ways of going about those goals. Like, Thanos didn't want to wipe out all of the Earth. He wanted to wipe out half the population and create a new world in his image with that half of the population. Just restart humanity. That's essentially what a High Evolutionary wants to do, but he doesn't want to wipe out half of the world's population. He's essentially going to experiment on these animals, put them on this planet called Counter Earth, that is essentially Earth, but has like mutated creatures and all that. But the ones that he doesn't deem appropriate to live there are just going to die. Like Rocket, Lila, that's addressed in the movie. He has this god complex where he's like, there's literally one scene where he says, there is no God. That's why I had to step in. He has this idea for a perfect society in his image. And yeah, it's essentially Thanos, but I think that it's different in the way that they go about it. Trying to acquire stones is different than doing experiments and lab tests on animals. I would say he's a good villain. I wouldn't say he's top 5 MCU villains. I think he's the best or second best villain that the multiverse saga has had so far. I just think the actor kind of goes a little too extreme, especially in the second half where he just starts yelling all his lines to get his point across. I'm like, when you're more restrained, you're more menacing. And it's the backstory stuff with Rocket where I'm just like, I wouldn't want to mess with this guy. But when he starts yelling, that's kind of where I'm just like, I think he could tone it down a little bit, Skid Row, but he worked. I think his plan worked for me, even if it is similar to Thanos. I get that argument. I just think that there's enough differences there to make it feel like it's different enough and its own thing compared to Thanos. So. Counter Earth. Counter Earth is weird, man. I would not want to live there. Thank God we live on regular Earth and not Counter Earth, because Counter Earth is a weird place. It's essentially what I described with the High Evolutionary and his plan and what he did. He essentially created Earth in his image. Like when they first get to Counter Earth, it's you're looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, it's Earth. Like there's the Statue of Liberty, but then you actually see like a statue of the High Evolutionary holding like this animal, and it's all his like test subjects, his lab experiments that have gone perfectly. So in that way, it's his image of a perfect society. I love that it's really just the answer to Earth. I just like seeing planets that resemble Earth or feel like they are close to Earth, like Coruscant in Star Wars. I feel like it's the closest to Earth we're gonna get. And seeing a planet that resembles Earth like this in the movie is interesting. It just adds another layer of the cosmic elements to the MCU. I also just like that he's like, all right, like this isn't going according to plan. Okay, take off on the ship and blow up. His ship is located on Counter Earth, so the moment that thing takes off, Counter Earth just blows up and kills everybody on there. I'm like, I really feel bad for these creatures, these animals, and it sucks. There's an element to Star-Lord that I was hoping would be addressed, and it starts off in the movie actually, how he's kind of this drunk bastard who really just seems like he's just going to argue with everybody when he's drunk, and you can tell he's drinking because he misses Gamora, but that's the only scene in the movie that does it. And most of the movie is him pining over the fact that he loses Gamora, and then he interacts with the past Gamora, who doesn't really know who Peter Quill is or isn't in love with Peter Quill in the way that he wants her to be. So most of the movie focuses on that, and it kind of ditches the whole drunk thing. I needed a little bit more of the drunk thing. I think that would have made his emotions towards Gamora more realistic and feel more genuine. That's just a minor gripe of mine. It's not something that I think kills the movie. I do like that he has matured a lot though in this movie. It doesn't seem like he's much of the jokester. Like anything that goes wrong, he's always commenting on it, and he's commenting on it in a negative way. Like, why didn't you tell me that these buttons do this? Or, oh, that's your plan? That's a stupid plan. Like, he doesn't seem like the immature dick that we got in the first two. It seems like he's grown a lot as a character, and I think his experiences in both Infinity War and Endgame helped that out. And I like the way that James Gunn rated him. But where is his mask? The whole movie. That's what I was wondering. I was like, doesn't he have a mask? Like, when he essentially sacrifices himself at the end of the movie, but is saved by Adam Warlock, because we know that the MCU at this point, other than Infinity War and Endgame, just doesn't have the balls to kill any of the heroes. Should have happened in Quantumania. Ant-Man should have died. Like, we just know that they don't have the balls to kill anybody. But I actually thought Star-Lord was going to die. When he's freezing in the atmosphere of space, I was just like, they're gonna kill Star-Lord. Like, they're gonna do it. And then they cop out and Adam Warlock saves him. I'm like, come on, just do it, man. Why do these movies always cop out on the deaths, the most impactful deaths? Like, I think Star-Lord should have died. Honestly, it would have been more impactful. I think sacrificing himself in that moment, I shouldn't say it's a sacrifice because he's not really sacrificing himself. He essentially loses his mixtape, goes back for the mixtape, and that's how he almost dies. So he is a bit selfish. And I like that he still has that trait in him. So it's not so much of a sacrifice. That's my fault. I totally misremembered that. The Orgocorp stuff is hilarious. I just think that that's a funny looking planet. I think that All of the inhabitants there are funny looking. Nathan Fillion being this like major, what's his name? Major Karja, something that wears like this like puffy muscular suit. I think is hilarious. I just love the whole look of that thing. It's really white. It feels very Star Trekky, like something out of a really shitty Star Trek movie. And that's just a fun sequence. I like how that is it Orgoscope or Orgocorp? I think it's Orgoscope, the planet. How it's essentially living tissue and the planet's building itself around living tissue. I'm like, that's kind of fucked up, and that's cool at the same time. That has a really cool action scene there too. There's also an action scene later on in the movie after they save Rocket that takes place in a corridor where Rocket's essentially like, I'm done running. And he's the first one to walk to go kill the monsters on his way to go meet the High Evolutionary. And that's when No Sleep Till Brooklyn's playing. I love Gamora's reaction in the background where she's just like rolling her eyes and she's like, oh, I have to join these guys. And it's a sweet action scene. There's also a sweet action scene on the Orgoscope or Orgocorp. I have no idea what the hell you call it. Something. I know something. It's the headquarters of the High Evolutionary. I just love the look of it. It's so very cosmic MCU. It's so Guardians of the Galaxy-ish. It feels like a goofy planet, and it fits right in with the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think that's all I really want to talk about. I mean, I could talk about more plot details with Rocket, but I essentially wanted to talk more about his backstory. I mean, I could talk about how the High Evolutionary put like this like failsafe in him, and that the whole plot of the movie revolves around that failsafe going off, and now they have to get the override code, and that's how they get to Orgoscorp. But I was more compelled by the backstory for Rocket, where the characters end up, and that this was just all around a satisfying finale for the Guardians of the Galaxy, at least this group. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do next. I think if anybody returns, I think it's gonna be Star-Lord and Rocket and Groot. I think those are the sure bets. I don't think Zoe Saldana is coming back. She's already confirmed she's not coming back, but never say never. I think Mantis, Drax, Nebula are up in the air. Nebula is the most likely of those three, I think. I think Karen Gillan still wants to play her. But I really enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 more on rewatch than when I first saw it at the press screening a week ago. So if you have seen Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies is your favorite? Or rank the Guardians of the Galaxy movies? Let me know in the comments section below. I'll leave my link to my website in the description below as well. You guys are the best. Thanks for watching. My name is Alex, and I will see you at the movies somewhere.